Today's focus is going to be on how a wind turbine works. So how does it work? It basically works exactly as a turbine does, okay, but instead of steam as in a power plant, we are using wind as our um, part that will help move these blades. So then these blades move just like a turbine. The turbine turns the generator, and then the generator can conduct electricity. All right, there are four major components that you're going to need to know for the wind turbine and where they are located. The first one is these blades. What do they look like? They look like airplane blades. Okay, they do the exact same thing. They lift because of wind, and they keep doing this constant rotation. The next one is the hub. The hub actually all its purpose is to connect the blades to the generator. Okay, then we've got C, which is right here. C is called the nacelle, and that's where the generator is housed. So we have these guys as the turbine, and then you have the generator in here. And then D is known as your tower, and the tower is basically everything that holds this part of your wind turbine. All right, so let's just try to label these really fast. So A is once again called your blades. B is your hub, and basically it's just a connecting piece between the blades and the nacelle, which is right here. The nacelle holds your generator, and then you've got the tower that holds everything up. All right, so let's talk about large-scale turbines, which are the turbines that you see in the farm fields when you're driving down 55. First off, they're not made there, obviously, but they have to be transported there. So how do they transport them? They transport each individual blade on a huge semi. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they usually can carry only one, maybe two of these blades per truck, and they even are extended. They're so long. They're over 130 feet. Long. And so these blades are brought onto the farm. Let's say they're doing a wind farm, and they're brought onto the farm, and they will connect them at the farm. So they'll put all the blades, they will connect it to the hub. The blades in the hub will then be used, they will be lifted onto the tower, okay, and then they will be created and put together on site. Okay, so they don't transport this whole turbine together, they will put it on site. And the reason why they can't do it is because it's so ginormous. Okay, if you look at this, here's a barn, and here's just your three blades with your hub, and look at how huge it is compared to the barn. Okay, they also, because of how heavy it is, they will have to pour concrete. So they'll pour concrete under the ground, and then they will put your tower on. They will put your tower built into pieces. Typically, I believe it is 3 pieces put together, and then they will use a crane to put up your hub along with your nacelle and your blades. All right, so just to put it into perspective of how big this is, these are people working on it. So they're either checking the monitors right here for wind, or they're cleaning it, or whatever. They're trying to make sure that it runs really smoothly. What they typically will do is they will wear harnesses when they're on top of it. And how they enter is actually through a door on the bottom of the tower. They have ladders that you have to climb up, and they will be harnessed in while they're up these ladders too, because any fall will be a death fall. So they climb up these ladders, and then you can do all the work, which is not the most amount of space, but it does provide you quite a bit of space up here where your generator is. And then if they need to do any work on the outside of the nacelle, they will then once again use harnesses. There's a door right here that they can climb out. Okay, but to putting into perspective, here are the workers right here, and then here they are over here. So obviously this thing is extremely large. All right, there are 2 main turbines. I personally have never seen this egg beater type, but that one is done on the vertical axis, so it'll kind of like rotate like an egg beater, whereas this one is the one that I'm more familiar with. It's horizontal axis, and that's more of like a fan, right? All right, so you have wind turbines, and if you put a lot of wind turbines together, you get what we call as a wind farm. And what happens is with wind farms, you have a number of these turbines, and they're all wired together. They're all producing their own electricity, but they're combined together. And then they go to the transformer, and then the transformer then is sent to the transmission lines, and these transmission lines then can go directly into your house. Okay, so it's kind of replacing that whole power plant aspect of it, because here's the generation of the electricity, and then here's the transfer of it. The largest farm in the US is found in California, and it has 390 turbines, and it provides as much as a traditional power plant. So with 390 turbines, you get as much as a typical power plant does if the wind is blowing. Now, it does take up a lot more space than a power plant, but once again, you are dealing with renewable resources as opposed to non-renewable that is found in these power plants. You can find wind farms actually on land and in water. We do not have any in the United States on water, but you do a lot in Europe. They have them out off the coast. So you've got offshore wind farms. What is a benefit of being offshore? First off, wind is faster and smoother. As we've learned in the past, if you don't have any landscape issues, you know, like mountains that run into it or buildings and things like that, and wind has the ability to become stronger because it doesn't have anything that's impeding it, it will become faster and smoother. And that's what happens in the ocean. Obviously, it's going to be faster and smoother because it's at a greater distance without having any of these things that impede it. It is also typically closer to major populations because they are found on the coast. And so that allows you to not have to do as long of transmission lines from the coast to your house, as opposed to if you're in the middle of North Dakota, how do you get that wind all the way to where people actually live more often, such as in Chicago? All right, so large wind turbines, just to go over once again how huge they are. If you look at the Statue of Liberty, it is 305 feet. A typical wind turbine will be 328 feet. So you were talking, it is larger. Each blade is over 100 feet long. That concrete that I talked about will have to be 20 feet deep. So you will have to dig down and make a 20-foot concrete foundation in order to support the massive weight of these turbines. One of these turbines can generate enough electricity for about 500 homes, okay, on a typical day. All right, there's something called net metering, and this works with solar panels too. What net metering does is that is a method to measure the energy consumed and produced at the home, okay? So what it does is it based off of your wind turbine, it will tell you how much energy you produce by having that wind turbine on your house or by your house, right? And so if for whatever reason you're able to develop more energy from your wind turbine than you use, for example, one turbine does 500 homes, so obviously you're probably not living in 500 homes on your property. So any extra energy that you use will actually cause your meter to go negative, and that actually acts as a credit towards your electrical bill. So let's say it's not windy in all of March, it doesn't have any wind, but it was very, very windy in February. So in February you actually had credit, and then you'll use that credit to pay for all of the energy used in March. Okay, and sometimes companies, it depends on the company and the state, but actually what can happen is if you produce so much energy that you never use it all, then the company will actually buy that energy back from you. All right, so let's look at this map about wind. So first off, you've got the wind speed. So obviously the higher the wind speed, the more wind energy you will generate. So we are looking for blues and purples. So if you look at this on the Great Plains is where it is the most windy, okay? The thing is that you have the mountains over here, you have mountains over here, so it's able to generate that wind and make it a lot windier right here, okay? The problem why we don't have a ton of wind farms in this area, though, is because there's not a lot of population. The populations obviously tend to be on the coast, they tend to be in those cities. So you've these huge populations everywhere but where the wind is generated. And when you have that, what happens is that you're going to generate, let's say, the wind in South Dakota, but you're going to then have to use transmission lines to go all the way to places that where people live. And so the problem is you lose energy when you do that, and it costs a lot of money. So is it productive, cost effective to do that? And then you look at in the southeast, there is like almost no wind, so it's extremely non-windy there. So where you want the wind, it's not necessarily because the population's not there. All right, so what is the wind speed for our state? So once again, we have to find our state, good old Illinois, and so we're going to match it up. So we are going about from 6 to about 7.5 in different areas. So we were talking about 6 to 7.5 meters per second on average. Okay, and circle the windiest area in the United States, and that would be that guy, the Great Plains. All right, so this is what I was talking about before. So transmission lines are long and they're expensive. And the problem is where are the transmission lines? Well, they're all over here, right? So here's the transmission lines, here's the transmission lines, here's the transmission lines. What I first circled, now I'm going to do it in purple. That's where the wind primarily is. What do you notice about this area where the wind is? You notice that there are almost no transmission lines in comparison. And that's why wind generation is not the most efficient of where it could be, because the wind is here, but the people and the transmission lines are everywhere but. Okay, but there is still a lot of growth over the past few years on wind generation and using that for our electricity. The reason why is because there's a huge cost reduction in the cost of these turbines, and our efficiency has gotten a lot better. And we also have more of an interest in renewable technology. So not only are we developing better ones, but we actually better technology, so it's more efficient, but we are also just more interested and more willing to pay more money in order to use renewable versus non-renewable resources. But it really does come down to the cents. And if you look at in 1979, when we did have some turbines, but obviously it was very expensive at 40 cents per kilowatt, whereas now in 2011, it is less than 5 cents per kilowatt. I'm at about 4, I believe, for mine, where I use only renewable resources for my electrical generation. So why wind energy? What are some pros? Well, obviously it has zero emissions, okay? So you're not burning anything, so you're not going to be producing any of these greenhouse gases. Therefore, your air quality, your water quality, you're not going to be doing any climate change. You're not going to be producing any of these that contribute towards some environmental issues. Then it also helps reduce our fossil fuel dependence. So we're energy dependent. All we're dependent on is wind. We're not dependent on having to dig up. We're not having to depend on being able to find this below the ground. We're not going to be having to depend on other countries in order to ship it in and import it. It is also renewable, so we don't have to worry about it being gone, and there's no fuel price volatility. So you know how our gas goes up and down, we're not going to have that as much when you use just wind generation. But there are, as with everything, there's not always pros. There are some cons. First off, your property values go down if you have these, just because it's on the property, and so it's an eyesore, and it does, it takes away from where you could build or do other things. It does have a noise, though we will talk about it. It's not huge. The visual impact, the land use, and the wildlife impact. So we'll talk about the wildlife impact, but the visual impact is more of, if you see it, you just don't want to see it. Like, that's why Florida doesn't have any of these wind farms off of its coast, even though it would probably be good, or it doesn't have any of these oil rigs actually off of its coast, because when you look out off into the coast, you want to see a beautiful ocean scene. You don't want to see wind turbines. That'll stop your view. All right, so let's talk about noise. So people are like, oh, it's so noisy, things like that. But if you look at that, if you look at this chart, what it says is that first off, by law, you cannot have any houses within 300 meters of it. And if you look at the noise, it is equal to about that of a refrigerator. So your house where you would be living, you would have experienced noise that would be about of the refrigerator. And I don't know about you, but I barely ever notice my refrigerator's doing anything unless it's actually making ice or something. It's only when you get close to it, so when you're right on top of it, it's as loud as a lawnmower, which is loud, but we obviously are willing to mow our lawns and still go through that. So, and that sacrifice with noise. So in reality, it's not that loud. And your houses where you would be located are not close enough to where you would be disturbed by the noise. Wildlife impacts. A lot of people say, oh, you kill all the birds, things like that. But if you look at this chart, for every 10,000 birds that are killed by human activity, so these are by human activities, they are not by just, age, what causes their deaths? Well, if you look at it, they run into a lot of buildings. Over 55% of the deaths caused by human activities is due to them running into windows and buildings. We also have our lovely house cats that kill about 10% of the birds done by human activity. If you look at wind turbines, less than 1 is caused because of a wind turbine of deaths of birds. So it's very low. And But that doesn't mean that we can't try to stop even that under 1 out of 10,000. So how do we do that? Well, what happens is when you build them or where you place them, you have to avoid all major migration routes. Okay, you have to use slower moving blades. So they're slower moving so they won't hit them as easily. And then we use something called monopoles, which does not encourage birds to roost. So basically it's just a single pole, and that's where we do the hub and the blades. Okay, but this is just one pole. It doesn't have like anything where they can perch on it, these birds, so they won't stay there. All right, so let's talk about how do we use the electricity that's generated. Well, if you look at it, wind, which is blue, if you look at it over the years, what do you notice? We are obviously using a lot more of it than we ever have in the past. So it is the fastest growing energy source in the world as far as renewables go. If you look at wood, which is brown, you notice that it basically stays the same. If you look at geothermal, it basically stays the same. The only one that is also increasing is you've got the photovoltaic, which is solar panels. All right, so looking at this, this is installed capacity. So what states use this? Where is our generation from electricity for this? And if you look at this, our wind power capacity, we look at Texas, how much we've used. The leaders are Texas, Iowa, and California as far as wind generation. Where do you tend to be the most successful with it? Well, you have two things you need to worry about it. First, you need a good resource of the wind, meaning it has to be windy there. So notice that there's like nothing in the southeast, because remember the southeast had almost no wind generation anyway, so it would be a waste of money. And you have to be near transmission lines. Okay, so even though South Dakota and North Dakota has a lot of wind, South Dakota and Nebraska have a lot of wind, they actually don't generate that much because they're not near any of those transmission lines. So you need both factors in order to build a successful wind program. All right, so looking at the producers, if you look at wind power producing states, Illinois is number 5, Texas is the leading one. Okay, and then you've also got Iowa, California. These are wind power producing states. So we've got Illinois being 5th and Texas as number 1. These are the wind energy potentials though. So this means the previous slide was talking about how much do you actually use. Okay, out of all the wind that you have, how much do you produce? How much do you use of that wind? This is how much you could use. Okay, so Texas was number 1. It had the most wind. It's a huge state, and it is also on those Great Plains. So it will generate a lot of that wind energy. And then if you look at Illinois, which was number 5, it is now 15th though on wind energy potential. So it has the ability to generate wind out of the number 15. It has the most wind, right? But why was it number 5? Well, once again, you have to understand, what is Illinois? Well, it has a high population compared to all of these guys. Okay, so you look at Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, Wyoming, Nebraska. A lot of these, even though they generate a lot of wind, they don't once again have that population. So even though they have a lot of potential, they're not going to produce a lot of electricity from wind. All right, hopefully you guys have an understanding of wind turbines a little bit, and have a great day.